In psychology, trust is often linked to predictability and reliability. But in real life, most people don't actually define trust that way. They define it emotionally. So they say things like, I trust them because I feel safe, or I don't trust them because something just feels off. And that gap between how trust actually works and how people think it works is where so many relationship problems begin. Here's why. Because feelings are immediate, they are influenced by your past, your experiences, your conditioning, not just what's happening right now. Now, I'm not saying that your feelings aren't important, but what I am saying is that feelings aren't objective. It actually takes a lot of effort to step back and use those feelings as information rather than, like we normally do, as conclusions. So this means that you can feel safe with someone who really is inconsistent, and you can feel unsure around someone who is actually reliable. If trust were just a feeling, it should be accurate and guide you toward dependable people and environments and steer you away from those that aren't. However, anyone who has been in a bad relationship knows that is not what actually happens. And this tells us something really important about trust. Real trust is not an emotional experience. It is structural, foundational. Feelings aren't the problem. The problem is when we treat them as conclusions instead of signals. So most people are asking the wrong question of what am I feeling? And then they let those feelings dictate their conclusion. But a better question to ask is not only what am I feeling, but also what evidence actually supports what it is that I'm feeling? Or what is the pattern happening here? This is an important question to ask because it separates our perception from reality. Trust does not come from a single moment or from what is said in one singular instance. And it doesn't come from intention alone. Most people don't struggle with trust itself. They struggle to identify it clearly because they've never defined what trust is or explored what it looks like in behavior or how it's actually created. So today, we're going to make this practical and clear. My goal today is to define trust clearly, break down the components that create it, and show why it is so often misunderstood. So let's dive in and start with an example. Think about someone in your life that commits to something but only follows through when it's convenient for them. Maybe they say that they'll handle something, but you find yourself double checking anyway. They apologize, but their behavior doesn't actually change. And when you ask about it, they always have some reason that actually makes sense. So now you're put in a position where you probably understand them, but you don't feel secure around them. You can explain their behavior, but you can't really rely on it. You don't think that they're a bad person, but you also can't fully count on them. And so we try to justify the tension we feel as, I trust them, but something just feels off. You guys, that is not trust. That is unpredictable data, and at best, it's inconsistency with good explanations. Because here's the thing, anytime that we detect inconsistent data, our brain doesn't like the uncertainty, and therefore, it tries to fill in those gaps. And that's where so many people call this trust, because the definition of trust most of us have blindly followed implies that a leap of faith is required. Wrong. Real trust should not require you to ever fill the gaps. It requires enough consistency that there are no gaps to fill. So if that's not trust, what actually is becomes the question. Because if we're going to stop guessing what trust is, we need something more concrete. I am going to give you that. Trust is built through three things: character, consistency, and competence. And all three matter. Not some of them, not most of them, all three. Because if one is missing, trust will fall apart. Yes, I'm going to explain. Let's start with character. Character is strongly linked to integrity. Character simply answers the question of, do you intend to act in alignment with what you say? So character is really about honesty and integrity and whether your words and actions actually align. This is where a lot of people get misled or confused, because someone can sound like they have character by simply saying the right things. Maybe by understanding your perspective or offering compassion at the right moment, being empathetic when you need it the most. They can even take accountability. But character isn't proven in what someone says. It is revealed in what they consistently choose to do, especially when it is inconvenient. So the question I want you to ask when considering trust is, do their actions match their words or just their intentions? Number 2, consistency. Consistency is what turns intention into evidence. Do they do it repeatedly over time? Not once, not when it's easy, not when it just benefits them, but repeatedly. Because trust doesn't come from isolated moments. It comes from patterns. Inconsistency is easy to justify when there is a reason or context as to why someone has acted out of alignment. But the truth is that if behavior isn't consistent, then it is not reliable. And if it is not reliable, then it is not trustworthy. So now the question here I want you to ask when considering trust is, what behavior has actually been consistent over the last 3 to 6 months? And number 3, competence. Competence is the aspect of trust that people don't talk about enough. But competence is about someone's ability. It's about asking, can they actually follow through with their commitments? Because someone can mean well, care about you, and want to do better, but still not have the ability to do it because they might lack emotional regulation or effective communication skills or good follow-through, awareness even of the problem at hand. And this leads so many people to justify themselves by saying that they're trying. And that might be true. But the reality is that effort without ability still produces inconsistent outcomes. And trust is built on outcomes, not intentions alone. So the question I want you to ask here is, do they have the capacity to be consistent or just the desire? Now, my hope is that by asking these 3 questions, you can see that real trust is about all of these qualities combined. You must have all 3 in order to really call it trust. And here's why. Because someone with character and competence, but no consistency, is actually an unreliable person. And someone with consistency and competence, but no integrity or character, is a manipulative or self-serving person. And someone with character and consistency, but no competence, is well-meaning, but still unsafe to rely on. So now let's contrast this with what real trust looks like. I want you to think about someone you genuinely trust. Odds are really strong that you trust them because when they say they'll do something, they follow through. If something changes, they openly communicate it. When they make a mistake, they take accountability without getting defensive. And over time, you came to realize that their behavior is predictable. When we sense predictability in someone, we naturally trust how they will behave in any given situation. Now, let me say something about predictability, because if you're used to inconsistency, so that means being raised with inconsistent caregivers or inconsistent romantic partners, predictability is likely going to feel boring to you. Environments of inconsistency create intensity. And for those people who lacked safe environments, they can confuse intensity with connection and passion. But predictability is actually what trust feels like, because predictability reduces uncertainty, which, by the way, is a critical element of emotional safety. I would guess you've probably heard it before, that trust is the foundation of healthy relationships. Why? Because trust is what creates the safety that healthy relationships depend on. So let's talk about intimate relationships, because the definition of trust needs to be expanded to include a fourth element here. In intimate relationships, you also need the added element of consideration. So that means that someone will consistently consider the impact that they have on you. You can't fully have trust in a relationship without relational responsibility. I am not saying that trust is about believing someone will never hurt you. What I am saying is that in your intimate relationships, trust means that the other person will consider the impact they have on you and your well-being. Now that we've covered the definition of trust thoroughly, and we've added the element of trust in relationships, let's talk about what self-trust is, because self-trust is essentially the same model but directed inward. Now, using the same model of trust we already talked about, I want you to ask yourself, taking into consideration character, do I act in alignment with what I know is true? Taking into consideration the element of consistency, do I follow through on what I say I am going to do? And taking into consideration the element of competence, do I have the capacity to support myself when it matters? Now, asking yourself these questions exposes where you've lost trust in yourself. What most people find is that they lose trust in themselves because they've been inconsistent for so long. It's not because they're incapable or that they lack character. For example, you probably knew something was off and you stayed in a relationship anyway. You set a boundary but didn't stick to it or hold on to it. You told yourself that you'd do something, but you never followed through. And over time, this corrupts our trust in our own judgment. And when you don't trust your judgment, you start outsourcing your decisions to other people. Trust is the foundation of love, just as self-trust is the foundation of self-love. Without it, we lose stability. Self-love is not about liking yourself all the time. It's about consistently acting in alignment with what you know is true, even when it is difficult. That's why discipline is actually one of the deepest forms of self-love we can offer ourselves. Because discipline is the decision to keep showing up for yourself even when your feelings change, and prioritizing the future version of yourself over short-term comfort. When you fully understand this, you start to realize that trust cannot be built through intention alone, and it must be built through repeated behaviors that create reliability over time. So if trust is built through character, consistency, competence, and consideration, then the next question naturally becomes, how do we develop it? Because understanding trust is one thing, but creating it is where true change happens. Today, I want to offer you 5 ways to begin to develop trust. I want you to stay for all of them because the last one is so incredibly important. Number 1, align what you say with what you do, because trust starts with alignment. If your words and actions don't match, there is absolutely nothing you have to build on. Start small. Don't overpromise. Don't exaggerate. Don't say what just sounds good in the moment. Say what you can actually follow through on, and then follow through. 2, prioritize consistency. Most people try to build trust through grand gestures, deep conversations, and emotional highs. But trust is not built on intensity. It is built in repetition. So that means doing the same thing over and over again by showing up, by following through, by being steady. Because consistency is what makes you predictable, and predictability is what creates trust. Number 3, build competence. Stop defending your intention and develop your ability. Learn the skill, build awareness, and increase your capacity. Number 4, stop over-explaining yourself. When inconsistency shows up, don't try to explain it or justify it or minimize it, because that just keeps that same pattern in place. Instead, name it clearly, not emotionally, not reactively, just objectively call it out, because clarity starts to interrupt confusion and restores the sense of trust. And number 5, develop self-trust first. Everything we've talked about externally starts internally, because the reality is you cannot consistently build trust with others if you're inconsistent with yourself. Self-trust is built the same way. You do what you say you'll do. You hold your own boundaries. You act in alignment with what you know is true. And over time, you stop second-guessing yourself because your behavior becomes more reliable. And you start to make decisions with greater consideration for the impact they actually have on your own well-being. Now, before we finish today, I hope you realize that trust is not nearly as complicated as most people make it out to be. It's just rarely defined clearly. Trust is not random. It's not emotional. It's not mysterious. Trust is built through alignment, strengthened through consistency, supported by competence, and expressed through consideration for the impact that your behavior has on others and yourself. And when those things start to exist together, trust isn't something you just cross your fingers and hope shows up. It becomes something you can recognize in others, intentionally build, and confidently rely on. Because trust is not about perfection. It is about creating enough consistency, integrity, and care that people no longer have to guess where they stand with you.